Hello guys, my name is Nash. Welcome to Thursday Tales of Terror. TTT. Today's case is extremely cruel and it happened in the year 2010 in Osaka, Japan. Known as the Child Abandonment Case, two innocent children were abandoned by their mother in an apartment and they were cruelly left to die. Her children tried their very best to survive and went through extremes like consuming their own excrement. But in the end, starvation and dehydration was the cause of their death. How could a mother purposely leave her children behind to die and not even feel an ounce of guilt? What exactly went wrong? Let's dive in. On the 30th of July 2010, police received a call informing them that there was a strong pungent smell coming from an apartment located in Shinsaibashi, Osaka. Police rushed to the location and had to enter through the balcony as the apartment door was locked. When they entered the apartment, they were so shocked. The place was so messy and chaotic and there was garbage everywhere. The stench was unbearable too. Soon, the police were able to identify the source of the odor. There lies the body of the two young children and they were highly decomposed. They were lying face up in the middle of the room, surrounded by garbage and completely naked. The two young children were siblings. The older child was 3 years old and her name was Sakurako Hagi. The younger child was 1 year old and his name was Kaede Hagi. Forensic reports showed that the children were dead for at least a month before their body was found. The cause of death was reported as dehydration and starvation. The autopsy report shows that there was no food left in their stomach or intestines, meaning they had not eaten for days before dying. It was also reported that their mother had never taken out the garbage since she moved in, so there were piles of trash on the balcony and inside the living room. Many of them were takeout boxes, but there was no food left. The fridge was empty as well and the kids had to resort to licking the seasoning and condiments that they found. They also rummaged through all scraps of food and cup noodles to survive. The children's mother had used adhesive tape on the inner door to trap the kids in the living room. They didn't have access to the bathroom and could not get to the front door. There was excrement found all over the apartment and they had even eaten their own excrement out of desperation. The poor children also couldn't use the air conditioner, so they shed their clothes to stay cool and licked the frost from the refrigerator to get water. On the same day the children were found, the police managed to track down the location of the mother and arrest her. What drove her to do such a terrible thing? Sanae Shimamura was born in 1987 and was the eldest of 3 girls. She was only 23 years old when the incident happened. She grew up in a very neglected family environment. Sanae's father was a high school physical education teacher and he was a well-known rugby coach too. He married a total of 3 times and Sanae was born from his first marriage. While he was teaching in high school, he ended up marrying one of his students after she graduated. They had 3 kids together, but despite being married and having 3 girls, Sanae's mother was known to have casual affairs and have an active nightlife. The two eventually divorced when Sanae was just 7 years old. Sanae's father then remarried and took custody of the children. Sanae's father was often very busy with work and seldom paid attention to his daughters. Sanae's stepmother, who was responsible for taking care of the 3 children, didn't shower them with attention or care. According to Sanae, her stepmother always neglected them and it was Sanae who had to take care of her younger sisters. One of Sanae's nursery school teachers recalled that when Sanae was young, she was a very responsible girl who took good care of her younger siblings. But there are limits to what a child can do. Her nursery teacher remembered visiting her home when she was still in elementary school, but the condition of the house was terrible. Things were scattered around the entrance and the room, and the house was very cluttered. When her teacher got to know of what Sanae did to her children and saw pictures of the scene, she said it reminded her of the time when she visited her home. She was an honor student during her time in elementary school, but things started changing when she began to hang out with the problematic kids during junior high school. She had a bad reputation in school as she was often involved in mischief and misconduct, and she had run away from home a few times. She had quite a few relationships and once she asked her biology teacher to check if she was pregnant. After junior high school, Sanae's father enrolled her in a private high school and sent her off to live with a colleague of his. It's kind of a blur as to what really happened with her family due to limited resources I can find. I'm guessing that her stepmother probably couldn't or didn't want to handle her, and her father was too preoccupied with his job. So I guess the only way was to send her off instead of addressing the issue head on. She wasn't really happy with the arrangement at first. She was angry and she would be disobedient. But by the time she graduated, she had toned down and wasn't wasn't as impulsive as she was during junior high school. In May 2006, when Sanae was 19, she returned to her hometown and got a job at a Japanese restaurant. At that restaurant, she met a man who was in university and they started a relationship. Sanae got pregnant unexpectedly and they got married 7 months later. She also moved in to stay with her husband and his parents. In May 2007, Sanae gave birth to her first daughter, Sakurako, and in October 2008, she gave birth to her son, Kayade. Her husband had to drop out of school and work because he wanted to provide for the family. Everything was going well. Sanae was living a normal and happy life with her husband and his parents, who were also helping to take care of their 2 children. She even had a blog where she talked about her new life as a mother. She wrote, "Sakurako and Kayade are living leisurely. They are both growing up so quickly and I'm really happy." Neighbors at the time often saw Sanae playing happily with her 2 children as well. But it wasn't long before things took a turn for the worse. A little after Kayade was born, Sanae found herself back in trouble. Sanae got in touch with some of her old friends and started leaving her children at home with the grandparents. She would go out at night and sometimes she wouldn't return until morning. Slowly, she began to distance herself from her husband, kids, and in-laws. She started going out a lot and was incurring a large amount of debt. Behind her husband's back, she borrowed a sum of money from a financial institution. She was also having an affair, but eventually her husband found out about it, both the affair and the debt. In May 2009, at the age of 22, the 2 divorced and Sanae took her 2 children with her. She promised to raise the 2 children and settle the debts on her own. She was not given any kind of child support from her husband. So Sanae then moved to Nagoya City, and because she only graduated from high school, she didn't really have any skills. She managed to find a job in a bar paying a monthly income of 270,000 yen, which is about 1,900 USD. But that wasn't enough to sustain her life. She had to pay rent, utility bills, her kids' milk and diapers, her own living expenses like food and transport. Because she was struggling, she did ask her father and her ex-husband for help, but they refused. In October 2009, her son Kayade turned 1. She dropped a text in advance to her ex-husband asking if he would like to take their son out to play, but he didn't want to. No one wished Kayade a happy birthday except for Sanae herself, which was pretty sad because obviously the child did nothing wrong. In January 2010, when Sanae was at work, the 2 children who were alone at home forgot to turn off the tap water. As a result, the house was flooded. An agent was notified and he went down and was surprised to see that there were no other people except for the 2 kids. She was required to pay compensation because of the flooding, but she didn't have enough money. So she took her 2 kids and fled to Osaka. In January of 2010, Sanae accepted the job at the Delivery Health Institution in Osaka. Not to be confused with professional medical services, Delivery Health in this case meant call girl service. Because technically speaking, prostitution is illegal in Japan, but the adult entertainment sector offers a creative and unique way to give customers their sexual thrills legally. Delivery health services are just one of Japan's answers to this problem and are similar to hotel call girls. Sanae was also given a small apartment by the owner of the Delivery Health where she could reside with her 2 children, and he also found a nursery for them. According to sources, on that day itself, they both engaged in some sexual activity. Along with this delivery health job, Sanae started visiting host clubs where she could flirt and talk to good-looking young men to relieve her stress. And because she was so busy working as a sex worker, she started spending more and more time away from her children. Every time Sanae came home, she would bring back bento boxes, cup noodles or bread from the convenience store for her children to eat. She would then leave the kids at home for hours and lock them up in a room. A witness also saw Sanae at the nearby park sometime in March 2010 on her cell phone, not paying any attention to her children. Her daughter would constantly yell, "Mama, Mama," to get her attention, but Sanae would ignore and continued to use her phone. Sadly, Sanae's horrible behavior and neglect towards her children would only get worse. As early as March 30th, 2010, there was a series of complaints from neighbors. Neighbors complained about the children crying for a long time in the apartment and on the intercom, calling for their mom in the middle of the night. During this time, Sanae was out at various host clubs, spending nights with some men from the club or temporarily living at a friend's house. She would tell her friend that her kids were staying with her parents. She also visited her family in her hometown without the children and told them they were staying at a friend's house. So on March 30th, 2010, a concerned neighbor made a complaint via the abuse hotline to the Osaka Municipal Child Consultation Center. Welfare officers made a trip down to the apartment on the 31st of March, 1st of April, and 2nd of April 2010, but they were unable to establish contact with anyone, so they left. 2 more similar complaints were made and welfare officers would make a trip down, but each time they arrived at the unit, they were unable to get anyone to answer the door, so they just left. Due to the fact that the Delivery Health Institution had rented the property, the welfare officers from the center were unaware of who lived there. The center could not confirm the identity of the apartment owner or residents. They couldn't know for sure if children were in the apartment because they didn't hear any noises when they went for visits, so they couldn't do anything. On June 9, 2010, Sanae decided to leave her children. She used adhesive tape on the inner door to trap the kids in the living room. They didn't have access to the bathroom and could not get to the front door. She locked the door and moved to her friend's home. She simply abandoned them in that filthy flat where they would be alone, unfed, and unloved until they died. At the end of June, she told one of her colleagues at the delivery health shop that she left her children alone so they might be dead. She said she didn't feel like feeding them or giving them a bath. She started to think that she shouldn't have children. I know that small kids can't survive without giving them food or water. She added, "I wish I had no children." With the knowledge that her children will die without food and water, she continued to have fun, update her social media with photos of her going to gatherings and drinking with different people. Then on July 29, 2010, 50 days after leaving her children in the apartment, she went back to check on her children. Sanae found her kids both naked, lying in the middle of the living room in each other's arms, and decomposing. But she left them again, as if nothing had occurred. She didn't call the police and she didn't even bother to deal with the bodies. She left the apartment, went to a host club, and then had sexual relations with one of the men she was seeing. That night, she stayed at the Love Hotel with the man and sent an update on social media with the word fun. On July 30th, 2010, one of her colleagues was worried as Sanae didn't go to work for many days. Her colleague then went down to her home only to find an unpleasant stench coming from her apartment, and that's when the police were alerted. Police rushed to the apartment and found the poor children dead and highly decomposed. After the arrest, Sanae underwent psychological tests for about 5 months to see if she was mentally fit to be criminally liable. She was deemed competent to face trial, and her trial began in 2012. During the trial, Sanae told the court that she had no intention of wanting her children dead and was only guilty of abandoning them. Prosecutors believed that there was a murderous intent behind the abandonment, as they pointed out how Sanae had left no food in the fridge, blocked the exit with tape, and made it impossible for the children to survive for such a long period. However, the defense argued that Sanae loved her children and was only guilty of abandoning them because she suffered from a dissociative disorder and had been abused as a child. They wanted her to be tried for child abandonment rather than murder. On March 16, 2012, the Osaka District Court found Sanae guilty of murder and sentenced her to 30 years in prison. She avoided the death penalty because the court took into consideration her past trauma. Do you guys think that 30 years in prison was enough for Sanae for what she did to her poor and innocent children? I felt that so many things played a part in the children's death. Let's begin with Sanae's father. He was so neglectful towards her and her sisters. There was a particular source that mentioned that Sanae's father actually had new kids, so all the more he wouldn't have time for Sanae. Well, it's not like he ever did give her any attention or time since the very beginning. He could have at least helped her out when she was struggling with taking care of the kids and dealing with finances. And yes, even though Sanae did cheat during her marriage, her husband shouldn't have cut off all contact with the children. The children are innocent here and they did nothing wrong. It was very obvious that Sanae was unable to take care of herself, what more having 2 children under her care. Also, could the welfare officers have done anything more in their ability to save the children? For example, finding ways to contact the police or other agencies that could have helped figure out who was in the apartment and how to connect with them. But of course, Sanae herself could have chosen a better path, but instead, she chose to spend her money on drinks, going out with different men, and as a result, her kids were starved to death. She knows what it's like to be neglected, and yet she's doing the same thing to her children, but much worse. This is a very frustrating case. That's all I have, guys. Let me know what you guys think. Stay safe, and I hope to see you guys again on Thursday.